The quiet stormed wind was soft that morning in Santa Fe. The sky hung low with clouds, heavy with the kind of silence that filled empty rooms. Sydney Sweeney stepped out of her trailer, holding a coffee cup she hadn't really wanted. She wasn't late, but something about the day already felt wrong. People were moving, setting lights, shifting cables, adjusting reflectors, yet none of it reached her. It was like watching a movie without sound. She stood near the edge of the set, pretending to scroll through her phone, hoping no one would ask her anything. She had read the script 5 times the night before. Still, the words felt foreign in her mouth. She had always been good at memorizing lines, but lately it wasn't about memory. It was about meaning. Something about this scene didn't feel right. Not the lines, not the way the director wanted her to play it. Not the silence she'd felt growing inside her for weeks. Keanu Reeves had already arrived, stood by the monitor with the director nodding politely. He wore a quiet expression, his hands in his coat pockets, like he always did before the first take. He didn't talk much before filming, but he noticed everything. His eyes scanned the set slowly, and stopped on her. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just noticed. And that made Sydney feel both exposed and somehow safer at the same time. The assistant called her to makeup. She nodded, but she didn't move, not right away. When she finally did, her steps felt heavy, like she was walking through water. The scene they were about to shoot was supposed to be intense. Her character had to stand up to someone powerful. But off camera, Sydney didn't feel powerful, not even a little. Back in the makeup trailer, the stylist spoke softly, brushing her hair, applying foundation. Sydney kept her eyes closed. She tried to slow her breathing, to block out the voices in her head that kept saying, "Don't mess up, don't look weak, don't freeze again." She had frozen once, on another set, months ago, and the memory still lived in her bones. A knock at the door broke the silence. "They're ready," the assistant said. She nodded again, like a puppet. Walked out, stood under the lights, the camera rolled. The clapperboard clicked, and she forgot. The first line. Not because she didn't remember it, but because something inside her stopped. She opened her mouth, and the words didn't come. There was a pause. The director sighed. The camera operator shifted. The silence was thick. Then, before anyone could say anything, Keanu stepped forward. Not with frustration. Not with judgment. Just calm. "Let's pause for a second," he said softly. "Something feels off." The crew looked around, unsure. The director frowned but didn't argue. Keanu walked over to Sydney slowly, not directly. He just moved nearby, like a quiet presence, like he wasn't trying to fix her, only to stand with her. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice low so only she could hear. She looked at him. Her eyes were glassy, but not crying. She didn't know how to answer. She didn't know how to speak up. Not in front of all these people. Not when they expected strength, clarity, control. She didn't speak, but Keanu waited, not impatiently, not with pressure. Just waited, and something about that waiting felt like a gift. Finally, she said, "I don't know how to play this scene." Keanu nodded once, like he already knew, like he had seen this coming. "Then let's figure it out together," he said. The director walked over, concerned. "We're losing light." Keanu turned to him. "Then we'll shoot it in shadow." He replied simply, "Because if we don't get it right, the light won't matter." There was silence again. But this time, it was different. This silence wasn't fear. It was respect. They stepped aside. Sydney held the script in her hands, but Keanu didn't ask her to read. He just asked questions. "What does your character feel here? What are they hiding? What are they afraid of?" And with every answer Sydney gave, her voice grew a little louder. Not louder in volume, but stronger. And for the first time in days, she felt something inside her shift. Not everything, not all at once, but enough to make her believe she could find her way back. When they returned to set, the sun had moved lower. The golden hour was almost gone, but no one complained. Sydney stepped into the scene again. The camera rolled. This time she spoke. Not just her lines, but her truth. And when the director called cut, no one moved. Because something in the air had changed, Keanu looked at her and nodded once. Not as praise, not as approval, but as understanding. And for the first time that day, Sydney smiled. A small smile, but real, and it stayed. The echo beneath the surface heath next morning came quietly. Sydney sat on the small bench just outside the trailer, wrapped in a soft gray hoodie, legs tucked beneath her. The steam from her coffee rose slowly into the cool morning air, but she wasn't looking at the sunrise. Her eyes were focused on nothing in particular, lost in thought, replaying yesterday in her mind over and over, not the mistake, not the forgotten line, but the moment when she was heard without saying anything loud, without trying to impress, without pretending. It had felt like something cracked open, just a little, the way Keanu had stepped in not to protect her, but to pause the world around her had left something behind. Not just gratitude. It felt like he had given her permission to breathe, to speak, to not know all the answers, but that feeling, that fragile strength, was already fading as the day's schedule began. The call sheet had a new scene listed for both of them, more intense, more emotionally raw. The director had rewritten parts of the dialogue late last night. Sydney read it twice, then 3 more times. But her chest tightened each time she reached the midpoint. There was a line where her character had to raise her voice, not in anger but in conviction. It was the turning point of the scene. Sydney had always struggled with that kind of moment, not because she couldn't act it, but because it mirrored something she still hadn't faced in herself. Standing up, speaking clearly, without apology. She knocked on Keanu's trailer door before she could change her mind. Her hand shook slightly as she waited. He opened it without surprise, as if he had expected her. "You okay?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. "Not really," she said, her voice soft. "I read the new scene." Keanu motioned for her to sit. She did. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I read it too." She looked down at her hands. "I don't think I can do it the way they want." He didn't rush to encourage her. He didn't tell her she was talented. He didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, he asked, "What part feels wrong?"
F.
"Not the line," she replied. "It's what it asks from me." He nodded, listening. "They want her to be loud," Sydney added. "But I don't think loud means strong." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You know something?" he said gently. "Some of the strongest people I've met in my life spoke with quiet voices, but their presence filled the room." She looked at him, surprised by the truth in his words. "What if your character's strength," he continued, "is in her stillness, not her shouting? But the director? We'll talk to him," Keanu said simply. "Together."
I'll later.
That day on set, they approached the director side by side. Sydney's heart was beating fast, but Keanu's calmness steadied her. He explained their thoughts not as a demand, but as a question. Could they try it differently? Just once? To her surprise, the director didn't push back. He was curious enough to let them explore. They rolled the camera. Sydney entered. The scene, her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It didn't demand attention. But it carried something stronger, certainty. The room fell silent as she delivered the final lines. No yelling, no dramatic pauses, just presence. When the scene ended, no one clapped. It didn't need to. The quiet spoke louder. Later that night, she found a folded note in her trailer. It was written in black ink, simple handwriting. "Truth doesn't always need volume, just needs you." Sydney held the note in her hand for a long time. Read it again and again, then placed it carefully inside her journal. She knew she wasn't fixed. She still carried doubts. Still had moments when her voice disappeared inside her chest. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in that silence. And that changed everything, because someone saw. Her, not the actress, not the image, but the person behind it. The ripple effect week moved forward like a tide, slow, steady, and full of quiet changes no one could fully see. The crew was busy. Cameras were rolling, scenes were getting tighter, but beneath all the usual rhythm of filmmaking, something was shifting in Sydney. Not everything, but something small and important. She no longer rushed out of her trailer to blend into the background. She still walked quietly, still kept to herself most of the time. But now, when someone passed her, she lifted her eyes. When a crew member asked if she needed anything, she didn't brush it off with a shy "I'm good." She looked at them, smiled, and answered with intention. It wasn't confidence. Not yet. But it was beginning. On Thursday, the producers visited the set. One of them, a man known for his sharp tone and quicker judgments, sat in on a few takes. The scene was one where Sydney's character walks away from something she once thought she needed. It wasn't written to be loud or dramatic. It's just reflective. The take went well. The director seemed pleased. Even the camera operator whispered, "She nailed it." But when Sydney stepped off the set, she overheard the producer speaking to someone. "Else she's too soft," he said. "She needs to punch it harder. People don't pay to watch actors whisper." Her heart sank. The old voice returned, the one she had worked so hard to quiet. The one that said, "You're not enough." It whispered through her chest, like smoke in an old chimney. She walked away, her hands trembling. But before she reached her trailer, she heard footsteps behind her. "Keanu." "You heard him," he said softly. She nodded, not looking up. "You want to talk about it?" "What's the point?" she said, barely above a whisper. "He's not wrong." Keanu waited a moment before replying. "Maybe not. Maybe he wants louder. But that doesn't mean louder is better, or real." She didn't answer, not because she disagreed, but because she didn't know how to believe it. He continued, "You know what the audience remembers? The moment they felt something they didn't expect. Not the shout, not the twist, just the truth." Sydney turned to him then. "But what if my truth isn't what they want?" Keanu smiled gently. "Then it's exactly what they need." The words didn't fix everything, but they landed deep. Later, that evening, Sydney stood by the catering table. One of the young assistants, maybe 20 years old at most, nervously approached her. "Hey," she said, voice low. "I just wanted to say, that scene you did today, it reminded me of something. I went through it, was like, said what I couldn't." Sydney froze for a moment, her eyes wide. "Really?" The girl nodded. "Thanks for not playing it loud. It made it feel more real." And just like that, the words of the producer faded. Not fully, not forever, but enough for Sydney to take a deep breath and smile, because someone saw her truth, and it mattered, back in her trailer. She found another note under her script. This one was different, typed from the director. "I want you to know, the way you've been approaching your character, it's changing the tone of this film, and it's better because of it. Keep doing it." "What you're doing," Sydney held the note in her lap, speechless. She had spent so much of her career trying to do what others expected, adjusting her voice, her walk, her thoughts, shrinking her truth to fit the mold. But now finally, her stillness was shaping something bigger than herself. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest. And honesty had a ripple effect. Keanu didn't say anything else that night. He just passed her near the trailers, gave her a small nod, and walked on. But she nodded back this time. Not with hesitation, but with quiet strength. The day it cracketh wind picked up on the fourth Monday of the shoot, blowing dust across the studio lot. The skies were clear, but there was a certain tension in the air that no one could name. Something was coming. Not a storm, not weather. Something inside. Sydney stood by the costume truck, arms crossed over her chest, waiting to be called in. Her phone buzzed with a message from her manager, then another from a reporter asking about a rumor. She didn't open them. Not yet. She had learned something over the past few days, that her peace mattered more than her replies. Still, the pressure hadn't gone away. The pressure to prove herself, to rise above quiet doubts, to push past the old stories in her head. New scene that day was different. It wasn't about confrontation. It was a moment of collapse, a breakdown. The script called for tears, shaking, a full body unraveling. Sydney read the notes in the margins. She had done scenes like this before, but they always made her feel vulnerable in a way she wasn't ready for. This time the scene was even harder because it was personal. She walked to the set. Slowly, the set was quiet. The camera crew moved. around like shadows. The lights were soft, warm, diffused to look like a sunset even though it was noon. Keanu stood just off to the side, already in costume. He was watching the space, reading the energy like a seasoned traveler reads maps. The director walked over, script in hand. "This is your moment, Sydney," he said. "The audience needs to see her fall apart here. Don't hold back. Give them everything." She nodded, but her stomach tightened. What if she couldn't? What if she gave too much? What if her truth wasn't clean or beautiful or poetic, but just messy? They rolled. Sydney walked onto the set, heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She stood in the marked place, breathed in once, exhaled, and began. The first line came, then the next. Her voice cracked not because she made it, but because it cracked on its own. Real tears came, but not because she forced them. They rose like a tide she couldn't stop. Her knees buckled, her arms wrapped around herself. She was no longer performing. She was remembering memories she hadn't invited. Moments from her own life, quiet moments, hurtful words. Years of being told she was too much or too little. All of it surfaced, and she broke in front of the camera. But it wasn't ugly. It was real. The director didn't say cut. Keanu stepped into the scene, though it hadn't been written that way. His character was supposed to enter later, but something pulled him in. He walked slowly, reached out, and simply placed a hand on her shoulder. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. Her back slowed, her shoulders relaxed, and the scene held. Still like a painting frozen in time. Then, gently, the director whispered, "Cut." No one moved then. Slowly, the crew began to exhale. People looked at each other. Someone wiped a tear from their cheek. No one clapped. It would have felt wrong. This wasn't a performance to celebrate. It was a truth to respect. Sydney walked off the set, still shaking. Back in her trailer, she didn't say anything for a long time. She sat on the small couch, blanket over her legs, staring at the wall. A knock came. She didn't answer. The door opened slowly. Keanu peeked in. "Just wanted to check in," said. She nodded, barely able to speak. He stepped inside and sat across from her, leaving space. After a while, she finally said, "I wasn't acting." He nodded. "I know. It just came out. That's what makes it powerful. But what if people don't like it? What if they think it's too raw?" Keanu smiled softly. "People aren't looking for perfect anymore. They're looking for real." Her eyes filled again, but this time with something else. Not fear, not sadness. Release. Keanu stood to leave, but paused at the door. "You didn't just act today. You helped people feel less alone." Sydney sat with those words long after he left. That night, she turned her phone back on. Her inbox was full, not with gossip, but with messages from crew members. Friends, even people she didn't know well on set. They had seen the raw footage, and they felt something the assistant director had written. "I watched that scene 3 times in a row. It reminded me of when I broke down and no one noticed. Thank you for showing it's okay." Her hands trembled, but not from fear. They trembled because for the first time, her silence had led to something louder than any scream. Truth, honest, imperfect, necessary truth. And someone had made space for it. Someone had waited. Someone had noticed before she even knew how to speak. Louder than applause, final week of filming had begun. The sun rose earlier now, painting long shadows across the dusty lot where trailers stood in quiet stillness. But inside Sydney, a different kind of light was rising. She still moved gently, still didn't take up too much space, still whispered thank you every time someone brought her water or helped with her mic. But something in her walk had changed. It wasn't pride, it was presence. After the raw emotional scene earlier that week, something shifted in the crew. People looked at her differently, not with celebrity awe, but with human respect. They saw her now, not just the actress, but the woman. The one who had broken on screen and didn't apologize for it, and they respected her more for it. The scene that morning was simple. A quiet conversation between two characters who had been through everything. It was a scene of stillness, of aftermath, of healing. And Sydney felt ready for it. Not because she had all the answers, but because she no longer feared the questions. She walked toward set. She saw Keanu sitting alone on the edge of the soundstage, staring out into the morning light. He wasn't meditating. He wasn't reading. Just sitting. "May I join you?" she asked. He looked up, smiled gently, and nodded. Of course. She sat beside him for a few moments. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. Then she said, "Thank you." He glanced at her, confused. "For what?" he asked. "For noticing," she said. "For not trying to fix me. Just being there." Keanu looked down at his hands, thinking. Then he said, "We don't need to fix what's not broken. Sometimes we just need to help someone find their way back." She looked out toward the horizon, her eyes glassy but calm. "You did that for me?" Keanu shrugged. Maybe you were already finding your way. I just didn't get in the way." They both smiled. The director walked over with the assistant, handing out new script pages. A few lines had been adjusted. Sydney flipped through the script and paused. One of her character's lines had changed. Now it said, "I never needed to scream to be heard. I just needed to believe someone was listening." She looked up at the director. "Did you?" The director nodded. "Rush your last scene 5 times. It changed the way I saw her. It changed the way I saw the film." For a moment, Sydney couldn't speak. She felt her chest tighten, not with panic, but with a deep sense of release. On set, camera rolled. Sydney stepped into the frame with Keanu. They didn't act. They simply existed. The lines flowed like water. Their eyes held. Truth. When she delivered that new line, she didn't perform it. She lived it. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. The sound guy forgot to breathe. The assistant director stopped watching the timecode even. The makeup artist stopped checking the monitor, because what they were watching was no longer a movie. It was a moment, when the director finally whispered cut. No one moved. Then slowly, quietly, the crew began to clap. Not a loud applause, not cheering, just steady, soft clapping, like rain on a roof. And it wasn't for the performance, it was for the courage. Sydney stood still, hands at her side, unsure what to do. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Keanu stepped beside her and whispered, "Just take it in, not because you need it, but because you earned it." She closed her eyes and took a slow breath, after the shoot wrapped for the day. A reporter showed up for a behind-the-scenes segment. Sydney was asked to sit for a quick interview. She hesitated, looking around for an excuse to step away, but Keanu was standing nearby, and without saying a word, Dee nodded once, so she sat. The reporter asked, "A lot of people are talking about that one scene, the emotional one. Can I ask what you were thinking in that moment?" Sydney looked into the camera for a second, then she said, "I wasn't thinking, I was remembering, and letting it be seen." The reporter smiled. "Do you think the scene will change how people see you?" Sydney thought carefully before replying. "I hope it helps people see themselves," she said. "That it's okay to fall apart. You don't have to shout to matter. Your quiet moments still carry weight." After the interview, the reporter turned off the camera and whispered, "Thank you. My sister has anxiety. I think she needs to hear this." Sydney smiled. So did I. That evening, the crew held a small celebration for the final days of filming. There were snacks, music, laughter, but Sydney didn't stay long. The crowd still overwhelmed her as she stepped outside. She saw Keanu again leaning against a railing, staring at the stars, escaping the party too. She asked. "A little quiet, never heard," he said. They stood there in silence, side by side. Then she said, "I always thought the world only listened to the loud ones." Keanu replied, "The world listens to the honest ones." Eventually, looked up at the stars, and for once she didn't feel small beneath them. She felt seen. The silence that Stayed's final day of filming arrived with the kind of soft morning that made the world feel gentle. The sky was pale blue, stretched thin like silk, and the air held that golden quiet before everyone else woke up. Sydney stood. By the edge of the lot, away from the trailers, away from the lights, just holding a paper cup of tea between her hands. She hadn't spoken to anyone yet, not because she was avoiding them, but because she didn't need to fill the space. Today was the last scene, not for the movie. Not technically. There were still a few small moments left to shoot later, but today's scene was the last emotional chapter between her character and Keanu's. It was the final goodbye. The moment their characters part ways, not with anger, not with regret, but with gratitude. And the truth was, Sydney wasn't sure how to play it, because this time, characters' emotions weren't just fiction. Anymore, they were hers. The journey her character had taken, the doubt, the silence, the slow uncovering of a hidden voice, was her own journey too. She had lived it, and now she had to let it go. As she stood there, watching the light rise across the rooftops, she heard familiar footsteps behind her. Keanu. He didn't say anything at first. Just walked up and stood beside her. She didn't turn. They didn't need to look at each other to speak anymore. You ready? He asked quietly. I'm not sure, she replied. That's okay, he said. It means it matters. They walked to set together. The scene was simple. Her characters would sit on a bench in a wide open field, say a few parting lines, and then separate. It wasn't written to be dramatic. There's no tears, no big confessions. Just a goodbye that meant more than words could say. Sydney sat on the bench. The cameras rolled. Keanu sat beside her for a moment. The director didn't call action. He just let the moment breathe. Then, quietly, he said, "Whenever you're ready." Sydney turned to Keanu. Her character's line was supposed to be, "Thank you for walking with me when I couldn't find the words," but she didn't say it. Instead, she looked into his eyes and whispered, "You saw me before I even knew how to look." Keanu didn't respond with the scripted line either. He said, "And you stayed when others would have turned away." The director didn't cut. He let the silence stretch. The wind moved gently across. A bird called in the distance, and then, without another word, their characters stood, walked away, and the scene ended. Cut, the director whispered. No. One clapped. No one moved. Sydney stood still, hands at her sides. Eyes wet, but not crying. She felt full, not with pride, but with peace. Later that day, as the trailers were being emptied and lights packed away, Sydney sat at the same spot where she had spoken to Keanu days ago by the soundstage railing, under the open sky. He found her there. In his hand, he held a small notebook. "For you," he said, handing it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside were pages, filled with quiet notes, observations, affirmations, things she had said, things he had seen. There were sketches, quotes, even the first note he had left her weeks ago. Written in. At the very back was one final message. Your voice isn't in your volume. It's in your presence. And it's already changing the world. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest. I don't know what comes next, she said. Keanu smiled. No one does. That's why we take it one truth at a time. Before he left, he turned to her and said something she'd never forget. One day, someone will sit where you're sitting, scared, unsure, quiet, and you'll notice them. Because you remember what it felt like to be noticed. That night, she went home. She turned off her phone, lit a candle, and opened a blank page in her journal. She didn't write anything dramatic. She just wrote, I don't have to speak loudly. I just have to speak truthfully. Months later, when the film premiered, critics praised Sydney's performance as unshakably real. Delicate but fierce, a voice that stayed long after the credits. Interviews flooded in. Magazines called, directors reached out. But none of it meant more than the message she received from a teenage girl in Ohio. It read, I watched your scene 10 times. I've always been the quiet one. I thought I was invisible. But when you spoke softly, I felt seen for the first time. Thank you for teaching me that I matter without needing to shout. Sydney held that message in her hands, eyes filling with tears, and then softly, she whispered to herself, that's why I do this. Not for fame, not for applause, but for the silence that stays. when truth is spoken gently, and for the one person who learns how to speak because of it?